Cheryl Johnson presents the Best of Kitchen Creations Home Edition. Today we're making caramel apples.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Johnson of Cheryl's Catering in Ukiah, California. I've been sharing some of my favorite recipes with people lately from over the years, and one of the best recipes that people just love is my vanilla caramels. So I'm going to share that recipe with you and show you how it's done. Then we're going to dip apples into the caramel and make caramel apples and take it one step further and roll it in popcorn and make what I like to call popple apples. So let's get started and see how these popple apples are done.
Making candy requires a thermometer to get the exact temperature. I like to use a second clip from another candy thermometer. It seems to work better. Clip it on so that there's a little bit of room underneath the thermometer so that it gets an accurate temperature and it's not reading off the bottom of the pan. The first thing I put in is 1 cup of butter, which is 16 tablespoons or 2 quarter-pound sticks. Place the butter in a pan that's large enough to not foam over when it boils, and then turn the heat on to a medium temperature and get the butter to melt a little bit. As soon as you have a little pool of melted butter, you can add the sugar. Measure out 2 cups full of white granulated sugar, and then you add it into the pan with the melting butter. The reason these caramels are going to be so tasty and delicious is because we're using real butter and real vanilla in this recipe. Stir the sugar a little bit into the butter and get it to melting slightly, and then it's time to add the heavy whipping cream. 1 cup of heavy whipping cream, and make sure it's the heavy whipping cream and not the light cream. You won't get the same texture and thickness. And the thickness is very important for a caramel. They can't be so soft they won't hold their shape, and they can't be so tough that they pull your fillings out. It has to be somewhere in the middle, and exact temperature is very important too. Once the butter, sugar, and cream have melted somewhat, it's time to add the 2 cups of dark corn syrup, which is a 16-ounce bottle. This is a non-high fructose corn syrup. I like to drain all the corn syrup out of the bottle to make sure that the recipe comes out correctly. One trick that I like to do is to just set the bottle on the spoon sitting in the pan and just let all the corn syrup drain out. Once I'm satisfied the bottle is drained, I will continue to cook and stir until the sugar and the butter are melted. The mixture is very thin right now. When we get closer to the end, you'll see it start to thicken up quite a bit. While the mixture continues to cook over medium heat, I'll wash and dry my apples, clip the stems off, and then poke them with a skewer or a popsicle stick, and these will be the apples we're going to make caramel apples out of. Make sure all the sticks are straight up and let the caramel cook for quite a while. It's got probably about a half an hour to go over the medium heat, and it's starting to boil. It will start to foam up somewhat, so that's why we want to have a pot that's big enough to cook in. This is the centigrade side of the thermometer. This is the Fahrenheit side. Fahrenheit is the side that we use here in the United States, and we're going to cook the caramel up to about 244 degrees. We stick the thermometer into the boiling liquid, making sure that the bottom isn't touching so that we get a more accurate reading of the liquid, and continue to cook and stir and watch the thermometer very, very closely to make sure that you can catch it before it gets too high. After a while, the caramel will start to thicken up. It's taking a little bit longer to run off the spoon, but it's nowhere near done just yet. Continue to cook and stir and keep an eye on the liquid. Make sure that you get the corners so that you don't get any burnt parts, because that'll make crispy spots in your caramels later. As soon as the thermometer reads just under 244 degrees, I'll take it off the heat and add 1 more cup of heavy whipping cream. The reason I take it off just before it reaches 244 is because the heat continues to rise in the time that you get the cream and pour it in. It'll rise just a tiny bit of a degree, so you don't want it to go over the 244. Pour the cream in a little bit slowly and mix it up in there, and that's going to thin out the caramel once again. but it will thicken right back up as soon as I bring it back to temperature. The temperature I'm going to bring it back up to is 247 degrees, just 2 more degrees above what we brought it to previously. I'm going to make sure my sticks are all straight in my apples and that they're nicely air dried for the dipping process, and get my wax paper ready on a sheet pan. So that'll give the apples a nice stable base to firm up on after they've been dipped. I like to butter the wax paper a little bit to make sure that they don't stick. The caramel will thicken up nicely as it gets close to the 247 degrees that we need to get it finished. And once it's finished, we're going to pour in pure vanilla. 1 teaspoon of pure vanilla. And that's why they're vanilla caramels, because they actually do have vanilla in them. Since the vanilla has alcohol in it, it tends to foam a little bit, so you want to stir it carefully and slowly until it's all incorporated into the creamy, buttery, delicious caramel. It's going to smell so good. You can just pour it over ice cream right now and have a nice caramel sundae. Don't forget the nuts and the cherry. See how it holds its shape? Once it's fairly warm, not really hot, but it's holding its shape well, that's when the apples can be dipped. The caramel won't be so hot as to cook the apple soft. I make sure and coat the apple nicely, and then once it's coated, it can be eaten plain or rolled in nuts or different candies and placed on the buttered wax paper to firm up. In about a half hour, they're ready to be enjoyed. Or you can roll them in popcorn and make what I like to call a popple apple. I press the popcorn on it like a popcorn ball, and that adds a little bit of fun and festivity to the whole caramel apple thing. These make a nice addition to a Halloween party or a Thanksgiving dessert buffet. I like to make them pretty by wrapping them in cellophane and tying them with a colorful bow. That helps keep them fresher for a few days. The rest of the caramel will be poured into a buttered 4 by 8 inch pan, and if it doesn't pour easily, I can always heat it up just a little bit to get it to a better consistency. It goes into the pan, and then it becomes very nice and smooth and solidifies into a nice creamy caramel overnight. Sometimes I cut the caramel into squares and dip them in melted chocolate or white chocolate, or make a round log and roll it in nuts. Then you can make slices off of it rather than wrap each one individually. This delicious caramel is great on a caramel apple, but I find them a little hard to eat, so I like to chop up a few nuts, slice up the apple, and wrap it in a strip of caramel. Then I like to dip it into the walnuts and make an appetizer-sized piece of caramel apple that's a lot easier to eat. For wrapping the caramels individually, I cut little pieces of wax paper so that they can be wrapped and put into little boxes or Ziploc bags for gift giving or just to have around the house for people to enjoy. I like to butter the knife before cutting the caramel. That way it doesn't have as much drag on the knife and tends to not stick as much. You cut a little strip off the end and then pry it up out of the pan. It likes to stick back to itself, so you have to work quickly. Once you have the strip out of the pan, it's time to cut it into little individual squares to be wrapped up. I like to cut my strips of wax paper up ahead of time because caramels can be very sticky and you want them all ready for you when you go to wrap them. You just wrap them long ways and then twist the sides together so that it makes a cute little piece of old-fashioned homemade caramel candy. People love these caramels. They love popple apples, they love caramel apples, and the caramels themselves are just buttery and delicious. And if I don't make these every year for Christmas, I'm in big trouble. Look at how soft and chewy, and they just melt in your mouth.
These popple apples are really fun, and kids love them, and adults like them too. They add a festivity to any occasion. So you can eat them off the stick, or you can cut them up into wedges with a knife and eat them in a more sophisticated manner. So either way, enjoy your popple apple your caramel apples and your caramel. You can give those away as gifts for Christmas or just have them around as treats. People really like those caramels, so if you make them, you'll probably have lots of friends. Thanks for sharing my kitchen with me. I'm Cheryl Johnson of Cheryl's Catering. Bye-bye.
Funding for this program is sponsored by Cheryl's Catering, Cakes and Video Production, featuring wedding services as well as banquets and buffets. For more information, email cherylcakeforyou@yahoo.com or you can phone 707-463-2544. This has been a Cheryl Johnson video production. Thanks for watching.